Welcome back, everyone. In this next session, we're going to talk about garden issues, whether they're pest problems, disease problems, or simply other issues that happen in the garden. We're going to talk about how to prevent them, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what to do if they occur. So this first section is going to talk about general things that you can do to prepare your garden to resist pests, insects, and disease. And then the next sections will be specifically dealing with garden insects and with garden diseases. So number one, the absolute best thing you can do to prevent problems from happening in your garden in the first place is just to use some careful management and preventative controls. So a garden that is healthy and happy and plants that are well nourished, well watered, and receiving everything that they need to grow their best are going to naturally be more resistant to pests and diseases. And also, if you're taking that good of care of your garden, you're out there a lot, you're seeing what's happening, and you're going to notice problems much, much sooner. So be out there a lot. However much your schedule can allow for, try to be in your garden, whether you're harvesting or picking or just maintaining your plants. Look around and know your plants so that you'll know when things start to change. It really helps if you can correctly identify with the problem that you're looking at. And that's why we're going to include several resources where you can compare what you see online with pictures. We're also going to prepare you to do some research on your own and be able to contact your extension office when you have problems and be able to describe things to them so that they can identify the problem. And this is because if we treat the cause, because if we treat the symptom and not the cause, then sometimes we're not actually going to make the problem go away. And oftentimes also it can be too late to really stop the problem if we're just treating the symptom. While sometimes pesticides are an important tool in our toolkit, and I mean both synthetic and organic pesticides, we want to use them with extreme caution in the vegetable garden. And that's because many of the plants that we're taking care of, we're going to eat, and we want to be extra careful when we're using any kind of chemical, whether it's organic or synthetic, on food that we're going to eat. The other thing with weeds too is that many weed species are also closely related to our garden plants, and we've got to be very careful in that regard too. So as much as we can, try to use preventative and cultural methods first when you're dealing with a problem. So this could be things like shielding a plant from a bug using some netting or some frost blanket rather than just reaching for a bottle of spray every time. It's going to actually make things harder in the long run if you always rely on your last-ditch tools. So keep them as a last resort, but let's try some of these preventative and cultural methods first. So properly irrigated plants are going to be much more resistant to a lot of common issues. So much of what we see that goes wrong in the garden has at its root cause, no pun intended, irrigation issues. So plants that are overwatered tend to become susceptible to root rot, while plants that are underwatered tend to become more stressed, and that can really encourage more insect and disease infestation. So how do we give our plants enough water, but not too much, and also not encourage weeds? Well, a few ways we can do this. First of all, we can consider some alternative forms of irrigation. If you have access to or the budget for a drip system or soaker hoses, this is going to be your very best choice for watering. It's going to put the water where it needs it. You have a lot more control over how much you put down. You can be more precise. And if you're not watering the areas around your plants, you're much less likely to have weed problems. If sprinkler irrigation is your only choice, then that's okay too. And luckily our climate is arid enough or dry enough that we don't experience many of the same fungal diseases or issues that some of our neighbors in wetter climates do. However, if overhead sprinkling is your only option, try to avoid doing it late in the evening. Do it in the morning or very, very early so that the plants have a chance to dry during the day. So how much plant water do our plants need? Well, typically our vegetable plants need about 1 to 2 inches of water per week. Maybe a little bit more in the hotter parts of the summer or when they're really, really producing heavily. So how much is this? Well, it's enough that's going to saturate the top 12 inches of soil. That's where our roots are. That's the average rooting depth. We want to fill that volume with water. So what does that look like in your garden? I can't tell you. I can't just say, well, that's 1 hour 3 times a week. You're going to have to do a little bit of garden research. You can either put down some sort of cup or rain gauge that measures the water, or you can just simply water until you can get a stick or a probe down about 12 inches in your garden, and you know that's how long it takes to wet the 12 inches of soil. And then when do you water again? Well, when most of that has dried back up. Doesn't always pay to just look at the soil surface. That's not always the best indicator. Being consistent with your water is probably one of the best things that you can do. There are several disorders, especially in tomatoes and potatoes, that come about through inconsistent watering. So however you're watering, make sure you're putting down that 1 to 2 inches of water per week and that you're doing it in a consistent way. So mulching can help us a lot, especially if our watering can't be super consistent, and that's because it keeps the water in the soil and it reduces the evaporation, and it also can help avoid some of those fluctuations in temperature. There's lots of mulches that you can use, good, bad, and ugly, though they may still be effective. So a nice organic mulch could be anything like a clean compost, straw, chopped leaves, lawn clippings if you have not been spraying your lawn. If you have access to sawdust, that can work too, though that will rob your soil of some of its nitrogen. Manure is not really the best mulch, though well-rotted aged manure might be okay. We don't want to use fresh manure around our plants. And lots of people will use some of the plastic mulches. So if you live in a really cool climate, that may be the only way you're going to get melons or some of the other vining crops to mature. I have also seen in different community gardens and different home gardens people using everything from carpet to recycled rubber conveyor belts and newspaper and cardboard. As long as the material is not going to be leaching any toxins into the soil, and as long as it's clean and it works, then give it a try. These kinds of mulches are best used for keeping weeds down in pathways, not necessarily around individual plants. So what about bugs and disease? Are they unavoidable? Well, chances are you're going to have something happen in your garden throughout the season that you wish was not happening. But for the most part, if you do start with a healthy, diverse environment for all the plants and the beneficial insects in your garden, you're going to have a much easier time of it. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we want to provide some habitat for beneficial insects. So I think many of us are aware that we need to preserve our pollinators and encourage them, but we think less about some of the beneficial beetles and wasps and other critters that are our major predators and decomposers. So creating areas where they can hide and raise their young is really important. And so what this means is different levels and heights of plants, a diversity of plant material, maybe some mulches where they can crawl under, and just being cautious when you're using chemicals that you're not harming excuse me, that you're not harming the insects that you want to be living there. So this is another important topic, and that's sanitation. So if you do start to notice things in the garden, maybe you have some dropped fruit, maybe you have some leaves that have some funny looking spots, don't wait and see what develops. Simply get those cleaned up and taken out of the garden, throw them away, put them in the burn pile, whatever you need to do. Probably don't compost them if they look like they might have some kind of disease or issue, but really keeping things clean and sanitary helps a lot in the garden. Especially bacterial and fungal diseases can spread very quickly through wind or water once they're present in the environment. So like I said, removing any diseased or damaged plants is really going to help you to stop the spread. And then you might want to rotate your plant families. So in all but the very, very smallest gardens, this is possible to do and really a good idea. So the vegetable families, so each of the groups of vegetables should be rotated and not planted in the same location year after year after year. And this is because they tend to utilize a lot of the same nutrients, so you can exhaust the soil of those nutrients. You also may be attracting insects or diseases that prefer that species or that group of species. So if you do rotate, you're confusing your pests a little bit, and you are either returning or taking out different nutrients. So If you look at the nightshade family, these are your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, and tomatillos, so you might rotate those as a group. The onion family, onions, garlic, leeks, shallots, and chives. Your cucurbit family, so these are all your viney squashes, your cucumbers, your squashes, your melons, your cantaloupes, and pumpkins. These would all be moved together. The mustard or cole or brassica family, these are your cabbages, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, also turnips and radishes, kale, cabbage, and mustard greens. Then you have the legume family. These are your peas and beans. These are a really good crop to use in your rotation after a heavy feeder like corn or one of the mustards or a solanaceous plant. And then the grass family, this is your sweet corn, your popcorn, or your ornamental corns. So a few more. The carrot family, these are carrots, parsnips, parsley, and celery. The goosefoot family, love that name. These are your beets, your Swiss chard, and your spinach. And then the sunflower family, believe it or not, lettuce, Jerusalem artichokes, and endive and salsify. These are all some plants that are in that family. So you might think your lettuces belong in the spinach or in the cole crop family, but they don't. They're in the sunflower family. So here's just an illustration of how you might want to do this. You could move, if you had an in-ground garden, say you weren't gardening in a raised bed, you might just rotate from section to section the way it's showing you there. You've got your brassicas, legumes, other vegetables, and root vegetables, and you just move those in a planned out rotation, so that actually by this one, you're going at least 3 years before that crop is grown in the same location again. Here's another way that you might do it in a raised bed. You might just move whole crop families from bed to bed to bed, or if you've mixed your crops in with the others in the same bed, you might just move that whole, either move that pattern, or you might just move where you located it in the bed from year to year. And it is good to keep a written record of this, because it's amazing how quickly we forget what we did from year to year. So what about weeds? Weeds are going to be a fact of life for almost every garden, even if you have meticulous raised beds with rocks or something else around them. Weeds are still going to come in. And it helps to think about weeds like maybe unwanted family members that come into the garden. Most of our common weeds are closely related to our vegetable crops. And this means that obviously that they're going to like similar conditions. So if you do have a lot of weeds growing in your garden, well, it's probably natural for them to want to be there. The other thing is that most of the control measures, especially chemical control measures, are going to be highly toxic to your vegetable plants as well as the weed plants. So we have to think about some alternative means of controlling them. And why control them? Well, weeds are competition. Weeds tend to grow close to the desirable plants. They block sunlight, they steal water and nutrients. So your plants are actually going to be healthier and hardier if you can manage the weeds. The best control is prevention. A small weed is much easier to control than a large weed, and a weed that never even germinated is the easiest to control of all. So you can either pull them when they're small, or you can prevent them from seeding. This is usually a multi-year approach of mowing, of hand pulling, of using mulches, and other means to smother and keep the pressure down. So sometimes you may need to resort to an herbicide, and if you do, just make sure that you use it very, very carefully, and you use it on an absolutely still day, and even take maybe some precautions like putting a cardboard box over or between the plants that you want to keep and the plants that you want to spray. And then if all else fails, eat them. This is the Idaho Victory Garden course after all, and many of the weeds that we find in our gardens are actually edible. We have a professor of weed science, Don Morishita. He's in the Twin Falls, Kimberly area. And he actually has a paper that he's put out on edible weeds. So things like purslane, dandelions, common lamb's quarters, some of the others can actually be served up in a salad or a saute. So if you do eat your weeds, though, make sure that you have had them correctly identified by someone that really understands and knows weeds, so that you're not eating something that you shouldn't be. and certainly never eat any weeds that have been treated with herbicides or other pesticides, or have maybe been contaminated by pets or other animals. So that's just the basic overview of why we want to keep our gardens healthy and a few tips for doing so. We have a lot of other resources for you in this section this week, and then we also encourage you to watch the slideshow on insects and the slideshow on disease.